Good morning, this sunny Friday morning. I'm going to be talking today for the second time about prudence. This is part of my little series on virtues for a crisis. Those Christian virtues which are most useful in times of trouble. And I spoke in general terms yesterday about prudence, but I'm very aware that it's a dangerous thing for clergymen to talk about virtues, because there's a sense in which you can listen to someone telling you how useful and right and proper a virtue is and say, oh yes, I agree with that sounds fine, but nothing changes. So I'm going to think about, how do we gain virtue? How do we change? How does this virtue of prudence, for instance, take root in our souls? And I think the answer is that it's indirect, but in the Bible, we learn virtues like prudence through two things. One is Proverbs. Now, not just the book of Proverbs, which of course is packed with them, but there are lots of other proverbs in the Bible. And by learning all these different sayings, the idea is that we learn judgment. That's in the introduction to the book of Proverbs. It says that's what it's for. It's not just so you can learn lots of good little one-liners. It's so that you can learn which proverb applies to which situation. So you meditate on the proverbs, and you think about how you might put them into practice. And you do put them into practice, and you quote them to yourself as you're living your daily life. And the other way in which we acquire virtue is by listening to stories of people doing things which are wise. Now, obviously, as I say that, you'll think of the Old Testament, because it's full of stories of virtue and folly. It's full of proverbs tucked away all over the place. But it's also true of the New Testament. One way of looking at the Sermon on the Mount is to see it as being Jesus laying down the law of Christ, which is true. But a lot of the Sermon on the Mount actually consists of proverbs, which need a lot of thinking about. Each of the Beatitudes is a proverb. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall seek God. They shall see God, rather, for instance. And there are little stories tucked away as well. The story of the house built on the sand and so on. But even the law of Moses, it was a real eye-opener for me when I realized that the law of Moses is not a book of legislation. It is not like those tomes you see on the shelf of a solicitor's office. The law of Moses is meant to be a source for meditation. And many of the Psalms talk about how satisfying, how delicious it is to meditate on the law of Moses. In fact, it seems that an awful lot of those laws were never very strictly adhered to by the Israelites. And this is not just because the Israelites were naughty people. It's because the law of Moses was written so that we could, as it were, know God and gain the virtues of godliness. So there we are. Our Bible is full of stories and it's full of proverbs, and they're designed to teach us and change us so that we acquire the virtues that we're meant to have. So I want to turn to two stories now. You probably know them, and if you don't know them, or if you need a refresher, can I ask you to read them in the Bible? The story of Abigail, dealing with David, which is in 1 Samuel chapter 25, and the story of Naomi and Ruth, particularly how Naomi helped Ruth to find her husband in Ruth 3, but lots and lots of wisdom in the Ruth stories from start to finish. Now, one of the things we learn from these two women is that prudence is not about being passive. It's not about being cowardly or unimaginative. These were active women who were brave and imaginative in the way they exercised their prudence. And I think sometimes people think that prudence is just a way of avoiding mistakes. It's not. It's more than that. It's about, if you like, dealing with reality, acting in such a way that you tilt the odds, you tilt the outcome of what you do in a better direction. But prudent people can still be unlucky. Robbie Burns's most famous saying, I think, is the best laid plans of mice and men off gang astray. Sorry, agley is what he wrote. And it's a Scots dialect. But what he means is that no matter how carefully you think and plan, things still go wrong. But prudence is a way of coping with life in a way that is not only clever, but is also godly. Well, as I said, could you read 1 Samuel chapter 25 when you've got time? But I'm going to read the key moments. You probably know the story. Nabal, the husband, a wealthy man with quite a few retainers and guards and shepherds, was asked by David to help with food and supplies for his men, and he gave a very rude answer to David's men. Such a rude answer that he provoked David to vow that he would kill him and not leave one man left alive in the whole of his organisation. Now Abigail doesn't know that's David's plan, but she hears from the servants how Nabal was rude and offensive and silly with David. So she immediately does something, and she does a lot. She packs loads of food on lots of mules or donkeys, and she doesn't tell her husband anything about it, and then she rushes off to try and meet David, because she's fairly sure that David is already angry and probably coming to destroy her husband and all the people connected with him. She was right in that regard. Anyway, this is the moment when they meet. When Abigail saw David, she quickly got off her donkey and bowed down before David with her face to the ground. She fell at his feet and said, "Pardon your servant, my lord, and let me speak to you. Hear what your servant has to say. Please pay no attention, my lord, to that wicked man Nabal. He is just like his name. His name means fool, and folly goes with him. And as for me, your servant, I did not see the men my lord sent. And now, my lord, as surely as the Lord your God lives, and as surely as you live, since the Lord has kept you from bloodshed and from avenging yourself with your own hands, may your enemies and all who are intent on harming my lord be like Nabal, and let this gift which your servant has brought to my lord be given to the men who follow you." Just a couple of obvious remarks on that. Abigail wasn't very respectful about her husband, was she? He said, his name sounds like the word fool, and that's pretty much what he is. She didn't respect her husband's wishes. He didn't want to give David anything. Instead, she packs up a whole train of animals with loads of supplies. And she goes on her own initiative to make peace with King David. And she did the right thing. She brought a realistically big gift, enough to feed his 600 men, and pleaded for David not to avenge himself. And what's interesting is the way she makes it about David's own soul, saving him from bloodshed, saving him from anger and vengeance. Let's read a bit more. "Please forgive your servant's presumption. The Lord your God will certainly make a lasting dynasty for my Lord, because you fight the Lord's battles, and no wrongdoing will be found in you as long as you live. Even though someone is pursuing you to take your life, the life of my Lord will be bound securely in the bundle of the living by the Lord your God. But the lives of your enemies will hurl away as from the pocket of a sling. When the Lord has fulfilled for my Lord every good thing he promised concerning him, and has appointed him ruler over Israel, my Lord will not have on his conscience the staggering burden of needless bloodshed or of having avenged himself. And when the Lord your God has brought my Lord success, remember your servant. Abigail has an eye on David's future. She knows how to appeal, if you like, to David's better nature. Now, easily, David's mighty men could have tore through Nabal's followers. It would not have been a hard thing for David to take his vengeance and take the thousands of animals. He could have fed his men for months on the milk and meat. But Abigail, in her prudence, has saved the day. And she has saved David from being just another blood-stained, ruthless ruler. She has helped him to become the man of God that he would be. That's how prudence works. It's not just about avoiding risk. It's about seeing the consequences, or the possible consequences, of different actions. It's about acting wisely. It's about taking chances, but it's about taking the right chances at the right time. That is prudence. The other story, which is shorter, is the story of Naomi advising Ruth how to find a husband. And again, it seems risky. It's very proactive. Let me just read from the first 4 verses of Ruth chapter 3. One day Ruth's mother-in-law Naomi said to her, "Daughter, I must find a home for you, where you will be well provided for. Now Boaz, with whose women you have worked, is a relative of ours. Tonight he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. Wash, put on perfume, and get dressed in your best clothes. Then go down to the threshing floor, but don't let him know you're there until he's finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place where he is lying. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do." Now, in a Bible study with some mothers, I asked them, is that how you'd advise your daughters to find a husband? Obviously it worked. There's a cultural context here, isn't there? Naomi knew what would be appropriate, but I think she probably went beyond what was normally appropriate. I think she knew Boaz, and she knew Ruth, and she knew the circumstances, and so she recommends a very bold course of action, but it is still prudent, and that's my point. Prudence is forethought. Prudence is wisdom in action. It is knowing the wisest way to proceed. And of course, the end of the story is wonderful. And Ruth does become one of the ancestors of Jesus Christ. But it starts with the prudence of her elderly mother-in-law, figuring out what Ruth might do to find the right man for her. And when you look at these 2 women, Abigail and Ruth, one thing they have in common is that thoughtfulness, which is able to judge how to behave. It's not just a matter of dodging the bullets, of sidestepping the potholes. It's a matter of positively judging wisely how to live. In times of crisis, when everything's up in the air, that's the moment when prudence really shines. So there you are. That's a couple of little thoughts on the Christian virtue of prudence. And I hope that you will be prudent in your judgment calls in this time of crisis. God bless you, and goodbye for now.